In the first part, we discussed the question, where did the three holy kings find Jesus? What does the Bible say? Now the question arises, why was the whole world so deceived? We will answer this question today. A brief summary of the conclusions from the first part of this Bible study. Where did the three holy kings find Jesus? What does the Bible say? The Bible does not say that there were three, nor that they were kings, nor that they were holy. But where did the wise men from the east give their gifts? We find the answer in Matthew 2 verses 1 to 12, in connection with Luke 2 verses 21 to 40, with reference to Leviticus 12, where it says what to do after the birth of a child. So we only have to put these three biblical passages in context.
And when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down, and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold, and frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. And when the days of her purifying are fulfilled, for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring a lamb of the first year for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering, unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, unto the priest. And if she be not able to bring a lamb, then she shall bring 2 turtles, or 2 young pigeons, the one for the burnt offering, and the other for a sin offering. And the priest shall make an atonement for her, and she shall be clean. And to offer a sacrifice according to that which is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves, or 2 young pigeons. And when they had performed all things according to the law of the Lord, they returned into Galilee to their own city, Nazareth. And the child grew, and waxed strong in spirit, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him.
If you put these verses together, then the wise men from the east had not yet arrived at the home of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Otherwise, they would have had the necessary money to pay for the required lamb. But since they used the sacrifice of poor people, the wise men from the east had not yet been with them when they presented Jesus in the temple in Jerusalem. And verse 39 of Luke 2 clearly states that after the presentation of Jesus in the temple, they returned to Nazareth, their hometown. The answer to the question of where the wise men from the east found Jesus is, they found him in Nazareth and not in Bethlehem. Now the question arises, how and why could the whole world be so deceived? The Bible gives us a good answer.
These were more noble than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the word with all readiness of mind, and searched the Scriptures daily, whether those things were so. Therefore many of them believed, also of honorable women which were Greeks, and of men not a few.
Jesus also only defended himself with the Scriptures.
Then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward an hungered. And when the tempter came to him, he said, If thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread. But he answered and said, It is written, Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. Then the devil taketh him up into the holy city, and setteth him on a pinnacle of the temple, and saith unto him, If thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down. For it is written, He shall give his angels charge concerning thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. Jesus said unto him, It is written again, Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. Again the devil taketh him up into an exceeding high mountain, and showeth him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them. And saith unto him, All these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me. Then saith Jesus unto him, Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. Then the devil leaveth him, and behold, angels came and ministered unto him.
It is important to recognize here that in the second temptation, the adversary also quotes the Bible, but completely out of context. Jesus also defended himself against the theologians with the scriptures.
Jesus answered and said unto them, Ye do err, not knowing the Scriptures nor the power of God. And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tempted him, saying, Master, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? He said unto him, What is written in the law? How readest thou? And he answering said, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, and with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself. And he said unto him, Thou hast answered right. This do, and thou shalt live. But he, willing to justify himself, said unto Jesus, And who is my neighbor?
We must always observe these biblical principles in order not to be deceived. So how could the whole world be so deceived? We need to know that the Roman Catholic Church had banned the Bible for almost 500 years. This meant that people were unable to check their teachings against the scriptures. In the fight against the Bible-centered mass movements of the Cathars and the Waldensians, who had produced their own translations based on the Vulgate, the Church stepped up its control over the reception of the Bible. In 1199, in a letter to the Bishop of Metz, Pope Innocent III prohibited the reading of the Bible in private gatherings, occultus conventiculus, dark assemblies, conventicles. Although the desire to read and study the divine scriptures was not to be censured, but rather recommended. However, as individuals were hardly able to obtain Bible texts, this prohibition was practically equivalent to a ban on the Bible for lay people. In this context, it was easy for the Roman Catholic Church to embed all its unbiblical teachings and traditions in people's minds. And the people then accepted the teachings. When parents pass it on to their children, the false teaching is so ingrained that it is actually impossible for people to recognize the truth again. Only when our Creator and Redeemer Himself intervenes and shows us the truth will we be able to break through this structure of lies, and then we will also be able to see the other lies. But how did the Roman Catholic Church achieve this? She tells us herself here. Walter Johannes Mixa is the Roman Catholic Bishop Emeritus of Augsburg. He was also the Catholic military bishop in Germany from 2000 to 2010. Here he explains how the Roman Catholic Church covers up all pagan customs with the cloak of Christianity. Here is the explanation that a Roman Catholic altar is only an altar if a relic, i.e. a piece of a dead person, is in it or under it. This procedure is not found anywhere in the Bible. The biblical altar was to be built from unhewn stones. And later Moses was to make the altar out of acacia wood and ore.
Sicher, zum Beispiel die Farbe Schwarz ist ja früher eine sehr teure Farbe gewesen, auch die Farbe des Purpur. Und es ist ja so, dass für mich ist immer wichtig, dass das Christentum nämlich die vorausgegangenen Kulturen nicht zerstört hat, sondern in gewisser Weise, kann man sagen, getauft hat, teilweise übernommen hat. Also das kann man so sagen, gerade auch mit dem Altar. Der Altar kommt ja von den Opfergaben, nicht? Heißt der Altar ja Erdanhäufung, und diese Erdanhäufung ist durch die Reste von den Früchtegaben, dann von Tieropfern und da und dort auch von Menschenopfern ist das dann so aus der Erde herausgewachsen und zum Locus Sacer, zum heiligen Ort geworden, wo man sich dann gemeinsam getroffen hat, um eben die Danksagung den Göttern oder dem Gott, wie man ihn sich immer wieder auch vorgestellt hat, entgegenzubringen.
Here is the transcript of the video by Walter Johannes Mixa. Of course, the color black, for example, used to be a very expensive color, even the color purple, and it's always important to me that Christianity didn't destroy the cultures that preceded it, but in a way you could say baptized them, partly adopted them. So you can say that, especially with the altar comes from the offerings. The altar is called the altaria, earth accumulation, and this earth accumulation through the remains of the fruit offerings. then from animal sacrifices, and here and there also from human sacrifices. This then grew out of the earth and became a locus sacer, a sacred place where people met together to offer thanks to the gods or the god as they had always imagined him. Here we have the report about the first nativity play in history. 800 years ago, the first nativity scene, the first living nativity scene in the history of Christianity, celebrates its 800th anniversary this Christmas. It was Saint Francis of Assisi who, on December 25, 1223 in Greccio, a small village in central Italy whose rocky landscape is vaguely reminiscent of Bethlehem, brought villagers together to create a living scene of the events of Christmas Eve. This is where the tradition of our nativity scenes originated. We spoke to Luke Matthew about this. The Franciscan is a theologian and former provincial of the Friars Minor in Paris. Under what circumstances did Saint Francis reenact the birth of Christ at Christmas 1223? In 1223, there were still 3 years to go until his death. Saint Francis had already founded his order 15 years earlier. The Nativity story is one of the best-known episodes from his life. Incidentally, his life is well known because we know it from 2 contemporary sources. The Franciscan Thomas of Celano still knew the saint personally and wrote his biography at the request of Pope Gregory IX, who had already canonized Francis in 1228. And then we have the later account of Saint Bonaventure, the Minister General of the Franciscan Order, who wrote an official biography around 1260, which was largely based on the work of Thomas of Celano. Francis of Assisi was an enthusiastic supporter of taking the gospel at its word. He strove to imitate the life of Jesus Christ in every respect. Ever since Saint Bernard, a century earlier, Christians had been very interested in the deeds of Jesus, in his human life, in their piety. So what happened at Christmas 1223? To celebrate Christmas, Francis asked a nobleman from the village of Greccio to lend him a stable so that he could place animals there to depict the scene of the Lord's birth. He wanted to do this during a mass celebration. It was a living nativity scene with the traditional animals, the ox and the donkey, and the presence of the friars from Greccio and all the villagers. Francis himself preached the sermon. He preached as if he really had the divine child before his eyes. He let himself be carried away by his emotions and his eloquence, even shedding a few tears. Thomas of Celano's account is uplifting and picturesque. He emphasizes Francis' motivation. On the one hand, the saint was concerned with the humility that manifested itself in the Incarnation, a poor child next to the animals in a manger. And on the other hand, the love that manifested itself in the Passion of Jesus. These 2 events, the manger and the cross, in a way frame the entire piety of Francis, which he passed on to his brothers. How did this Franciscan tradition then spread throughout Christendom? After the death and canonization of Francis, which took place very quickly, only about 2 years after his death, the Friars Minor took over the veneration of Jesus Christ as the Word made flesh. In their sermons, they were eager to convey the contemplation of Jesus as man among men, as poor among poor, as simple among simple, and sometimes they did this by offering figurines and pictorial representations of the Christmas scene. This is the origin of the nativity scene. Not that Francis invented the nativity scene. Depictions of the birth of Christ already existed before in old manuscripts, as miniatures or sometimes in churches. Paraliturgies were also held on the forecourts of cathedrals. But this very simple, popular, village way of depicting the nativity scene was Saint Francis' idea. What happened next? From the 14th and 15th centuries, people gradually began to depict the nativity scene with figures. This tradition spread, particularly in Italy, Naples, and all the countries of the Mediterranean, especially in the south of France. The Franciscan friars were the most important popular preachers at the time and, following the example of Francis of Assisi, developed these living or pictorial representations with statues of the nativity scene and the Passion of Jesus to illustrate their preaching on the mystery of the Incarnation and Easter. They invited the people to a concrete contemplation. It was about seeing and touching. These special representations were no longer just paraliturgies, but rather popular devotions that people could perform themselves almost without the help of the clergy. They were continued in the families through, one could almost say, secular representations. This is a form of family catechesis. The tradition of the nativity scene is also closely linked to the Holy Land. How did this come about? The pilgrimages to the Holy Land have never stopped since the Crusades. More or less wealthy people from the West made pilgrimages to Jerusalem and visited all the holy places, where the Franciscans were the guardians. The Franciscans welcomed pilgrims from the West, mainly Latin Christians, and guided them to the various sites, reminding them of the life of Jesus. On their return to Europe, these pilgrims then wanted to make concrete representations from the memory of what they had experienced. In France, for example, replicas of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre were created. For the pilgrims, the nativity scene was a reminder of what they had experienced on the way to Bethlehem. The popular tradition spread quickly under the influence of the pilgrims and Franciscan preaching. How can it still work today for a nativity scene to bring us closer to the gospel, so to speak? For the evangelization of our contemporaries, it is very important to keep alive the memory of the holy places and their importance for piety, to get to know the concrete life of Jesus and to get a taste of the Gospels, a taste of the stories, so to speak. It is interesting to note that interest in nativity scenes continues unabated in our society today, even when society is secularized, as in France. Christian families, even the less practiced ones, are still keen to encourage wonder in their children, and also to wonder themselves and share the joy of Christmas, which remains a celebration of childhood and a celebration of family. It is also urgently necessary today that children are given this first access to the Christian faith and feel compassion for this poor baby Jesus. A nativity scene is a representation of the biblical Christmas story with human, angel, and animal figures, sometimes only with an open crib stable, sometimes in an elaborate model landscape. This is usually based on non-historical Oriental references and is intended to depict the Bethlehem region. However, the carvers, who often live in the Alps, have also adapted their homeland and created so-called alpine nativity scenes. The same applies, for example, to the Santons of the Provençal nativity scenes, which are decorated with accessories typical of the region. The centerpiece is the crib in which Jesus Christ lies as a newborn child. In German, the term Krippe therefore stands as a pars pro toto for the entire three-dimensional Christmas scene. Many nativity scenes combine the imagery of Advent with that of Epiphany. In a broader sense, other model landscapes with scenes from the life of Jesus can also be described as nativity scenes. After preliminary forms in the High and Late Middle Ages, the Christmas scene built with figures by Jesuits in Prague in 1562 was the first nativity scene in the modern sense. In the context of the Counter-Reformation, nativity scenes were promoted by the Jesuit, Servite, and Franciscan orders. Interlude. The Council of Trent took place in 3 sessions between 1545 and 1563. The main reason was the need to respond to the demands and teachings of the Reformation. 1562. The third and final period of the Council of Trent begins. It brings clarifications and demarcations from Protestantism, including on the sacraments of ordination and marriage as well as the Catholic liturgy. Nativity figures. 3 wise men from the Orient, Caspar, Melchior, Balthasar, with gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, usually symbolizing 3 ages and 3 continents. Usually Balthasar stands for Asia and brings frankincense. Melchior, on the other hand, is depicted as an old European and bearer of the gold, Caspar as a dark-skinned youth, handing over myrrh and symbolizing Africa. However, there are also different interpretations in which both Balthasar and Melchior are seen as dark-skinned. Camels, dromedaries, camel drivers, and sometimes elephants and horses are often depicted in connection with the so-called 3 kings. Wise men from the Orient, 3 holy kings. The reinterpretation of the Magi from the East in Matthew's Gospel as kings had already been completed by the time the first nativity scenes appeared and is therefore taken for granted. In the 14th century, St. John of Hildesheim asked the reverse question, "Why are the kings magi?" and answered, because of their wonderfully fast journey. As representatives of the non-Jewish world, they offered the Christian reader of the Bible opportunities for identification. Late Middle Ages. Francis of Assisi, who in 1223 in Greccio reenacted the Christmas story with people and live animals instead of a sermon, was once regarded as the founder of the striking depiction of the Christmas story. This theory is now outdated. After all, the events in Greccio were more of a nativity play than a figurative representation of the nativity scene. The celebration of the nativity scene in Greco is possibly connected to the Christkindlesweekend, which was widespread in women's convents in the 13th and 14th centuries. The first static nativity scenes developed in the 14th and 15th centuries, especially in Italy. A list of nativity figures to be carved for the Church of San Giovanni a Carbonara in Naples has been preserved from 1478. The Holy Family, ox and donkey, 3 shepherds, 12 sheep, 2 dogs, 4 trees, 11 angels, and 2 prophets and 2 sibyls. Some of these figures have been preserved. Counter-Reformation. Encouraged by the Council of Trent, 1545 to 1563, the Jesuit, Servite, and Franciscan orders attempted to deepen the population's knowledge of the life of Jesus through scenic depictions. In particular, the Passion before the main Christian festival of Easter and Christmas were brought closer in this way. Counter-Reformation. Boxes with biblical depictions were placed in churches and soon became popular in aristocratic circles too. Baroque nativity scene of the Marian congregation in the Jesuit church in Hall in Tyrol. The nativity scene set up on the high altar in the Jesuit church of St. Clement, Prague, in 1562 was the first nativity scene north of the Alps. As a novelty, it attracted great attention among the population. The first description of a Prague nativity scene dates back to 1581, according to which life-size figures of the Holy Family were apparently placed in a scene decorated with ivy-covered columns and trees. The display of this nativity scene was combined with the performance of Christmas carols. Christoph Daxelmüller places the nativity scene invented by the Jesuits in the context of the order's overall missionary strategy. They understood religion as an element of action that affected the body as well as the senses and emotions. The focus was on staging the Passion story, as Easter was the most important Christian festival and Christmas was clearly superior. The installation of the nativity scene in Prague was preceded by the construction of a Holy Sepulchre there by 3 years, which corresponds to a general trend. Several authors of the Jesuit order explained what the purpose of nativity scenes was. Counter-Reformation. The whole thing is so skillfully arranged that the spectator's sense of piety is most vividly aroused. They believe they are witnessing the miraculous event themselves, hearing with their own ears the wailing of the child and the heavenly music, feeling the diapers with their own hands, and a shiver seizes them. Philippe de Berlaymont, 1619. Following the example of the nativity scene set up in Munich in 1607, one was erected in Innsbruck around 1608 and in Hall in 1609. The crib with clothed figures purchased by the Marian congregation in 1622 is still on display in the Jesuit church in Hall. There has been evidence of a nativity scene in the Benedictine convent of Nonnberg in Salzburg since 1615. Among the most famous nativity scenes to this day are the Neapolitan nativity scenes, whose characterful heads are reminiscent of the masks of the Italian Commedia dell'arte. The scene of the birth of Christ is often embedded in extremely elaborate and detailed street and market scenes, so that the depiction of the birth often seems to be a minor matter. During the Baroque period, many nativity scenes were also created in Austria and southern Germany, Bavaria, Swabia, Allgäu, based on the Neapolitan model. Then, from 1562, the Jesuit Theater really began to take effect. Do you know the term Jesuit Theater? Jesuit Theater, also known as Jesuit drama, is the Catholic, Latin-language Baroque drama of the Jesuits, which was particularly popular in Jesuit schools in the 16th and 17th centuries. The performances broke with the traditions of Christian preaching and made use of secular entertainment concepts. History. The Jesuit Theater emerged as a response to the Reformation and was part of the Jesuit order's counter-Reformation efforts. The teachings of the Reformation began to spread and the Catholic Church faced harsh criticism. The Jesuit Theater aimed to win back the doubters and portray the Catholic Church as the triumphant victor. The audience was to be addressed primarily on an emotional level. In the first 100 years after 1550, the actual heyday, the Latin-language drama initially leaned heavily on the so-called humanist drama, only to soon become a magnificently ornamented conversion play. Among the most important authors in German were George Agricola, Nicholas von Avancini, and Jacob Biedermann. All performances were in Latin. So-called Periaken, program booklets, in German facilitated understanding. The dramas were not only shown in the 750 Jesuit colleges, The Louis Le Grand College in Paris even had 3 stages. There were performances in every major Catholic city and at the princely courts. One of the largest contemporary theater spaces in Germany was the Jesuit St. Michael's Church in Munich. The fathers produced masses of theatrical plays. Jean-Marie Valentin counted 7,650 titles, which were created within 220 years. The themes revolved around church history, Christian martyrs, legends of the saints, missions in the Far East, and similar religious and ecclesiastical topics. In recent decades, classicist material has also appeared. Viewers were familiarized with the Jesuit worldview. Following the example of the Jesuit Theater, school theater was also part of the regular school program at the grammar schools of other orders, such as the Franciscans. After 1773, the actual tradition of Jesuit theater ended with the abolition of the order by Pope Clement XIV. Even after the reestablishment of the order in 1814, there were attempts to revive this institution. Theater practice. The colorful performances featured music, ballet, and dozens of actors and extras populating the stage. The audience was kept in suspense by Baroque pomp and a firework display of show effects. Magnificent stage sets and props impressed the audience, as did all the effects of the stage technology of the time. Explosions, lightning and thunder, fire-breathing dragons, angels flying down on ropes, and ghosts swallowed up by the earth with infernal noise. In some cases, the audience was encouraged to play along and thus emotionally participate in the joys and sorrows of the stage heroes. Some of the performances were of such impressive vehemence that there are reports of spontaneous conversions. It is said that even sovereigns who were present begged to be readmitted to the Catholic faith on the spot. The torments of hell depicted with drastic stage effects were obviously more convincing in their imagery than argumentative words. And the Jesuit theater was developed further and further. The idea was perfected in order to deceive people and implant false doctrines in them that they could hardly get rid of. Laterna Magica. A scientific illustration of the Laterna Magica illustration can be found in the work Ars Magna Lucis et Umbri, The Great Art of Light and Shadow, by the German Jesuit Athanasius Kircher from 1671. In the text next to the magic lantern, Kircher mentions a Wallensteinius. Although Kircher was not, as is widely assumed, the inventor of the magic lantern, his work spread knowledge about the basics of this projection device. Friedrich Kittler describes Kircher as a kind of scientific fire department of the Pope. With special commissions and special powers, he was always on hand when new scientific territory had to be broken, but also defended in the name of the Church. The motifs depicted in the lantern images are typical of the time. With religious themes and terrifying images of skeletons and ghosts, performances with the magic lantern were used by the Jesuits in the service of the mission. The effect of the Laterna Magica was perfected by projecting ghostly images onto billows of smoke and curtains. Moving the lantern changed the size of the image. The flickering light made the images appear alive. Performances accompanied by eerie noises could terrify the audience in the darkened rooms. What do our children act out in the nativity play? Jesuit theater in perfection. This is the opening scene of Ben-Hur in the 1959 Hollywood version. Also interesting is the first official film version from 1925, Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ, in which the Roman Catholic veneration of Mary is even more clearly visible. Here you can see 3 pictures in the movie from minute 1302 to 1322. Everything we have learned about the Jesuit Theater applies here. A totally distorted, non-biblically based fable is being performed. And so people are hypnotized and kept in the lie. The father of lies has staged this quite skillfully.
Jesus said unto them, If God were your Father, ye would love me. For I proceedeth forth and came from God, neither came I of myself, but he sent me. Why do ye not understand my speech, even because ye cannot hear my word? Ye are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. And because I tell you the truth, ye believe me not. Which of you convinceth me of sin? And if I say the truth, why do ye not believe me? He that is of God heareth God's words. Ye therefore hear them not, because ye are not of God. But woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for ye neither go in yourselves, neither suffer ye them that are entering to go in. Now the Spirit speaketh expressly, that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry, and commanding to abstain from meats, which God hath created to be received with thanksgiving of them which believe and know the truth.
Ben-Hur, originally Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ, is a novel published in 1880 by the American general and politician Lew Wallace. The novel begins with the story of the birth of Jesus. The novel presents the characters of the wise men from the East as Caspar, Melchior, and Balthasar, in accordance with local tradition. This introduction extends over the first 5 chapters of the book. But where do the names of the Holy Three Kings come from, who were described in the Bible neither as three, nor as holy, nor as kings? The Bible describes them as wise men from the East. This depiction of the Holy Three Kings, with Phrygian cap, can be found in the Basilica of Sant'Apollinare Nuovo. Sant'Apollinare Nuovo is a 3-nave basilica church in Ravenna, Italy. Like the other Ostrogothic and Byzantine churches in Ravenna, it is best known for the wall mosaics in its interior. It is assumed that this is the earliest evidence that these 3 names were assigned to the Holy Three Kings. What is a Phrygian cap, and who wears such a cap? That will be revealed in the 3rd part of this Bible study. Only this much can be revealed. It has something to do with Mithras.
For we have not followed cunningly devised fables, when we made known unto you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but were eye-witnesses of his majesty. For he received from God the Father honor and glory, when there came such a voice to him from the excellent glory, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And this voice which came from heaven we heard, when we were with him in the holy mount. We have also a more sure word of prophecy, whereunto ye do well that ye take heed, as unto a light that shineth in a dark place, until the day dawn and the day star arise in your hearts, knowing this first, that no prophecy of the Scripture is of any private interpretation. For the prophecy came not in old time by the will of man, but holy men of God spake as they were moved by the Holy Ghost.